So this week we had this Kuota. This bike was on the surface immaculate, lovely bike, but you can see here the steering only had a few degrees of turn on it. The cables were too short. It would have been a very tricky bike to ride, because you wouldn't have been able to ride with no hands, because it would have trammed. It would have probably made your arms ache after a time. And so we've been given a little list of jobs to do. You can see on this front brake the quick release was seized, and we had a little list of jobs, bottom brackets, things to do for the customer, and this was a full strip down, full detail. One of the things he had problems with last time he put the cassette on was the lock ring here. He was concerned that he damaged the hub, but actually it was the lock ring itself was aluminium and the threads had gone on that, so we replaced that. So we initially take the bike apart. As with all our detailing, we literally stripped back to the frame. So out came the brake here. You can see the debris and dirt in ground in there. That's sort of an area you can't see when you're looking down on a bike. And you can see here when you pull that steering, it really pulls on them cables. It would, if you'd swerved to miss something, I think you'd have had an accident on this bike. It was quite dicey really. So again, you can see the brake there. The bolts were seized in with mud and debris, so they had to come out. And we had to undo the bar tape on this because we were doing a full replacement of inners and outers of the cables. So out comes the brake first. We use a little park tool attachment there that goes on the cable, because if we're replacing the cables, we want to try and keep as much originality, like make it as easy as possible. So we use tubing and things to run the cables through. So that's what we're just doing here on this front one. Just goes through the frame with a little bit of inner, and then we pull the cables out. You can see how these twist, they sort of sit in their guides and they gradually twist as they're pulled more. It's like anything with a twist in it, like the cables are wound in the first place. You can see this is the rear derailleur cable. Now, it had an adjuster on there, which you don't really need. All that creates is a corrosion point. You have the thumb adjuster on the rear derailleur, that's all you need to adjust it. So we actually took that out. So we kept the thumb adjuster on the front derailleur, but on the rear derailleur, when we rebuilt the bike, we actually took that thumb adjuster out and gave that back to the customer. And again, you can see here how that twists, and so fresh cables always makes a difference. Now, this was a real concern to us. This headset, the stem bolts, should be torqued on this bike. I think it was 5 or 6 Newton meters. I can't quite remember. I think it was 5. But when we turned that, we actually reversed the torque wrench, and they were done up to 14 Newton meters, which was way too tight. That would effectively crush the steerer tube. Now this is a carbon fiber steerer tube, so it's like crushing an egg. Eventually the strands inside would falter. So very important. It's one of the biggest reasons of bikes like handlebar failures is over or under torquing of the bolts that hold it. So we took out the headset bearings. The bottom one on them two was completely corroded, so we actually replaced the headset bearings. The customer hadn't asked us to, but we did. So this is the left hand crank arm, and it had a cadence sensor on it, so we decided not to put that in the ultrasonic cleaner. The bottom bracket, it was an original manufacturer's part with the original manufacturer's decals on it, but we actually decided to change the bearings because they'd only actually been done last year. We decided to change the bearings for ceramic bearings, so we tried to salvage, or well, we did, we kept the original manufacturer's bottom bracket but put our ceramic bearings into it, which you'll see a little bit later on. So now we're just stripping down the rear derailleur here before it goes in the ultrasonic cleaner, but we don't want to put them jockey wheels in because they have their own bearings in them, and we don't want to draw out any oil or grease that's in those bearings, so we put those in separately. So we put the derailleur housing in separately to the jockey wheels, which you'll see us cleaning in a moment. So we're just cleaning up that pedal arm now. The tie wraps that were used to put that on were cut off with pliers at some point, so we just snipped that off with a knife to get them nice and smooth so they don't catch your legs. And then we're just cleaning up the chain set here. Nice microfiber towel just to really get that tail off. So this is the jockey wheel. We just give that a little clean up independently without too much water or cleaning products, because it doesn't need it. The bearings are they've got seals on them for the life of the bearings, so they're already greased from the factory. They don't need excessive work. Next up, the brakes come out of the degreaser now, so we start to wash that down, and you can see there's a black sort of mark on those pads. That's just sort of build up from the wheel rim. We just skimmed those off and took that black off of there just so that they would have a good bite onto the wheel itself. So you can see they're really clean up. You can see how clean that came up in there. You know, the ultrasonic cleaner really works deep. It's something you can't always achieve at home. So now out come the derailleur. We've already had the chain and the cassette came out on the first wave of cleaning. We didn't actually show that, but we did actually wash all those down. So this is the bearing cups that the Shimano goes into. So we just wash them off as well because we're going to reuse those. The old bottle cages are washed down too. So, you know, everything on the bike is cleaned methodically and to our best of our abilities. And then we didn't T-cut this frame. I mean, it was immaculate. The owner of this bike keeps it spot on. But we did wipe that down with a damp microfiber towel to get off any debris before we polished it because we don't want to scratch it. So now we're just using a auto glim high resin polish, and you can see how that lovely reflection on that. These forks have way too much grease on them. It's not necessary to grease the entire thing, you know, it's not going to go rusty, so you know, we had to wipe all that grease off of there, and then before we finally give the forks a polish. And this was actually to the end of day one. This was the Saturday that we did all this work. We got to the stage where the bike was ready for rebuild, and then we drew a line under the day and we rebuilt the bike on the Sunday. So this is basically a full day's work to this point. The customer had already mentioned that those bearing caps were loose, so we tightened those up, and then we just checked both wheels in the truing stand just to make sure they were spot on. Once we got them trued correctly, we also checked the tensions on all the spokes to make sure we hadn't over or under tightened any of those, so they're absolutely spot on. These hump wheels are lovely. I had another set of these in this week, and they even use ceramic speed bearings on these. I can really recommend these wheels. They're a good wheel without a doubt. So we give this a little polish as well. This actually was all on the Saturday before the Sunday. All the cleaning we did Saturday. This must have been the last job of the Saturday. Give them a nice little polish up. You can see they come up lovely. Got all the hub cleaned as well. The quick release on the brake calipers, both were seized. Initially I thought I could just get away with oiling them, but that wasn't to be. So we had to take this apart and completely clean it up and re-lubricate it. Yeah, these were absolutely seized solid. So once out, it was just a matter of wiping them down and re-greasing them really. I'm amazed that they were as solid as they were. We re-greased them, as you can see there. Get them back together again, and everything works as it should. Little star bit there. It was nice because these were you know, the manufacturer's original brakes as well, so you know, the logo's on there and everything. It's important to try and salvage and save these things without replacing them because they're part of integral to the bike. So now we just lubricate up that rear derailleur on all its pivot points, and we use Shimano grease on the springs. When you get these new, you'd see that grease on there. Use Loctite 222 on the bolts that hold the pulley wheels. It just stops them coming undone, but that's quite a light Loctite. You'll always be able to undo them. It's not super strength, it's a light strength Loctite. Just works perfectly with those. And then just give the thumb adjuster a little grease up. That was quite tight when the bike came in. And then we move to the front derailleur, again lubricating all the pivot points, making sure everything's nice and smooth, and greasing up that spring. That spring sort of works on itself. It's what trips the derailleurs back on themselves, so it's important to grease those as well. I use copper slip on all my bearings. It's a grease that doesn't wash away very easily, so when you come to strip them down, everything's easier to do. Line up that logo on that bearing cap, line up the logo on this top cap as well, and then in go the bolts, and yeah, that begins to come together, and we do them with a torque wrench to the correct 7 Newton meters. I can see it written on there, so they go up to 7 Newton meters. The crown bolts should be 6 Newton meters. We moved the Garmin fit in there and marked it so we got it back in the same place, and again we turned these, and I think these were done up to 11 Newton meters, which is just way too tight. I don't know who ever did these up, but it certainly was they'd never seen a torque wrench in their life. So yeah, we just torque those up. We do them in a star or opposite configuration, so we go diagonally across so that the pressure is the same and equal on all 4 bolts. And now we're just beginning to recable the bike now. Always satisfying when this starts to happen. These were quite fiddly and time consuming, these cables. Fresh outers, fresh inners. Yeah, we're starting to get them back together now. Covers and things on, and we were lucky with this bike because the guides in there were through the frame, and it was just a case of threading them through, so it wasn't complicated to get this one back together. But again, there you can see there's now no adjuster on the back derailleur cable there, because you can use the thumb adjuster right at the back of the bike, so it's not needed. And then goes the inner. Now you can see there, look, you've got a lot more movement, you've got new bearings, the handlebars are free and loose, which means you'd be able to ride that bike with no hands. It wouldn't tram, it would be more comfortable to ride. Just everything about that is right where it was wrong before. Feather in the cables around the bottom bracket, screw in the guide. Another little bit Loctite on this cover because you never want to lose that, and I have seen those where they just come undone and go. And now we're just getting the cassette onto the wheel so we can refit the wheel. A new lock ring on there, locking up. And there was sort of a greasy debris on these skewers, and so I just cleaned that off and put fresh grease on there. And then the wheel goes in. Along with the front, we put the wheels in because obviously we've got to put the brakes and derailleurs and everything on, so we wanted the wheels in place first so we could line everything up and get it in correctly. Torque everything, so including the fitting, the mount bolts for the brakes. Nothing should be to chance. You don't want to do anything with your Allen key or Allen set and take to chance that you've done it to the right spec, because you might have over tightened it, you might have under tightened it. You need that right. So you always want to find out your manufacturer's specs and torque correctly. Now I just want to show you this. This is our cables. This is the original brake cable here at 1.5 millimeters wide. This is what we call super slick cable. It's 1.45, which I think is about 6 or 7% narrower, but what it actually has the same amount of fibers as a normal cable, but they're wound tighter. So when you feel it through your fingers, they're so much smoother than a standard cable. And also because they're wound tighter, there's just a little bit more clearance within the inners of the hours. The Alma cables, they run so smoothly in comparison with a standard cable. They're a little bit more expensive, but they make a world of difference to your shifting and your braking and just everything on a road bike. Just is so much nicer with them cables. They are a very, very nice cable, those. So we just use a little magnet here to get that cable through that handlebar. The handlebar has like a little channel inside there that the cables go through, and I think that was actually the fiddliest part of this bike, was getting everything through them channels. They're right pain really. But so front brake goes on. You can see we're getting that nicely spaced and clearance is correct. So we've got all the cables in now, so we just replace or refit the bar tape. Get that nice. Both sides, there was about a millimetre or 2 difference in the 2 sides when it came in, but we got those so that they sit in the same place. So now we've got the original cup there, and then these are our ceramic bearings. They're a lovely bearing where they have ceramic balls with stainless steel races. They outlast standard bearings supremely, just worlds apart from a standard bearing. So we put in the original Kuota covers there and then clean everything up. I don't think these are really designed to come apart, you're designed to just pull the whole thing out and replace, but we wanted to get our ceramic bearings in there, so that's what we did. And then we're now refitting the chain set. Plenty of grease, plenty of time, get everything torqued up, 13 Newton meters on these. And then we just check, you can see this one, look, is loose there. We just checked the derailleur hanger itself and that bottom one was loose. So now we get the front derailleur on, get it the right height and in line with the chain, like right angle to the chain set. And in goes our first cable. Onto the rear derailleur, again torque up the mount, in goes our cable. Yeah, we didn't torque that one up until we got it adjusted, that was right, just to make sure. Now, on goes our chain here. It's a lovely gold chain. We'd measured this previously, it had very little stretch in it, so we refitted the original one. And then we oil it. Now, I've got to just say, my son insists on putting this entire shot in because he filmed this and he was squatting. And he struggled to film this without falling over, I think. So we got this entire shot in for you. And then we just index the gears. Just get everything just so. And yeah, we just make sure everything's smooth, and then we nip off the cables. We use a little cable guide thing here to get them the same length. Both front, rear and rear derailleur are all the same length of tail, so you can see our little guide there. We like to make sure that detail is correct on every cable we ever fit. We know it's at one of ours because they're all the same length. And then on go to bottle cages. Now, I never ever use a torque wrench on bottle cages. I always do those by feel because they're often plastic or carbon, and you can do it better by feel than by torquing it because you can actually squeeze the plastic, and you know the torque, not really, it's not a metal on metal setting. And then the seat post, saddle, and then we just wipe down the saddle there with a bike wash just to get any grime off of that. We don't put any treatment on that as such because we don't want it to be slippery. And then finally we start to pump up the tyres and the bike is done. And what a beautiful bike it is.